Good afternoon. It's great to be in your presence again today for another episode, if you will, of Different Voices, Shared Visions. As you might recall, we are really a fortunate group here to be able to recognize that even though we come from a Muslim, a Jewish, or a Christian tradition, still we have much more in common than the things that separate us. And it's always our pleasure to be with you and talk a little bit about a topic and how it has influenced our religion and how our religion on that topic has influenced us. Today, as we do this, it's the 13th anniversary of 9/11. I just checked the news momentarily before I came here today. Of course, much of the conversation is about 9/11, especially as it relates to the situation in the Middle East with ISIS. And the various things that are going on there. Much of the conversation I saw was very reminiscent of the period after 9/11. Conversation about how terrible this is, that the gates of hell will be opened. A direct quote from one of our senators, if we don't go in there and do all sorts of damage to Syria and Iraq and every point in between. So once again, the same kind of conversations we've had after 9/11, we're having now, all based on fear. And so if you will allow us the privilege, I think we'll start by having each person again introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about how 9/11 has changed not only their life, but how they see it has changed aspects of our life together on this small planet. And so nobody really wanted to start today. It sort of makes us all feel good about how we felt in kindergarten and first grade, where we knew if we looked up and the teacher saw us, we were going to be called on. So I would ask you to keep focused on all these people and see how the first person I call on reacts today as he tells us about his memories of 9/11 and how it's affected his life. And so I think we will call on Rob first.
I was even going to volunteer at this point. So my name is Rob Wertheimer. I'm a lawyer here in Hudson. I am Jewish. I am the adult child of a Holocaust survivor. My mother was a child during the Holocaust, and I also grew up in New York City. And for me, 9/11 has always had a very personal effect. You know, it affected the whole world, of course, and all of America. And, you know, I still remember, I was just telling my daughter today, who was 2 years old at the time of 9/11, how I remember when taking pictures of the World Trade Center from the Empire State Building when it was still under construction. We would just go up there and visit. And how when I was in college, I went to college at NYU, which is in Lower Manhattan, and I worked even south of that in Lower Manhattan, not quite as south as the World Trade Center, but when I walked to work from college, I would walk south, and the World Trade Center would be in front of me, and the Empire State Building would be behind me, and I did that for 4 years. So, you know, it was part of my life for a long time, just the image of it and the symbol of it. And I think in going back and visiting over the years, for me, it was it obviously was a major tragedy, but I think it also made New Yorkers closer together in a lot of ways, because the New York I grew up in was, well, it was all the traditional unfriendly, dirty, horrible place to grow up in. And I think it's gotten much better. And through this tragedy, I think a lot of people in New York, there's more of a unity, there's more of a, hey, this is our town, more of a proudness of being New Yorkers. And I think it has, in a lot of ways, brought New Yorkers together. Again, it's just a horrible thing to have done that, but that's the one positive way of looking at it. And I do see a big difference. And again, like Dan said, after it's 13 years later, and we're facing now what some people are calling the third war since 9/11, this war that with ISIS here. But I think it has had, in some ways, a positive effect on us. And in any case, I think I'll open with that.
Thanks, Rob.
It's
Dr.
me.
Özkan.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dan. I'm Özcan Kilic, and I'm from Turkey originally. I live here in River Falls and work at the university. So 9/11, I first really want to share. When it happened, I was in Turkey, so I at that time couldn't really relate. I have to be frank about this. But after moving here in 2005, I saw how people were saddened during the anniversaries. I've been here since 9 years, and I really think that that attack was a fire that hit our nation, and especially the victims and the families. So I really want to express how sad I am about this, and I think this never should happen or have happened, but it happened. So some crazy people did it. On whatever behalf or reason it was, it never should have happened. I don't know whether we could have prevented it, but it happened. So I believe its major impact on our lives when I've the last 9 years, I think it has changed whatever it was before. I don't know, but what I've been told and what I've been observing is that people are more reluctant to get together or how do you say it, socialize with those who claim to be Muslims or who are Muslims. And this really, in this regard, is still what I think it's not good. I feel really sorry about this. We had the chance last year to visit the 9/11 memorial with our kids, and we have a little 4-year-old and a daughter. She's 11, and she was aware because she's been schooled here, and seeing the memorial was really impressive in the regard. I mean, how it was built. It told a lot of things. And the museum wasn't ready yet, so we couldn't visit the museum as a whole, but all the debris or some debris were displayed, and it's terrible. It's horrifying, and I really don't know what to say. But what happened is what I really don't agree with. I have to share this. We shouldn't accuse a whole faith. And this accusation is kind of puts me as a Muslim into a position where I feel sometimes I need to defend my faith. But why? Because I didn't do it. And those who did it, they claim to be Muslims. Maybe they are, but I don't think that it is in our religion to kill innocent people. And I don't know. It's very sad, and every anniversary is sad. But what strikes me more is that this, I mean, it's a tragedy, brings people together, but it should never have happened, and it shouldn't divide. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Dee?
Yeah, I remember the morning vividly. You know, we just came out of the hallway doing something, and my wife had the TV on, and we just sat riveted like we all did as the events unfolded. And of course, the horror and the shock. Oh, by the way, my name is Dean Simpson. I'm Lutheran pastor of a church, Cross Lutheran Church in a little town of Roberts, between Hudson and River Falls, sort of, and so we're all neighbors here. We all went through that and kind of shared that experience together and had the feeling that we're all Americans now. Even the French said we're all Americans now. So it's true, it did bring us close together in our sort of mutual feelings of horror and how could anyone do this and so on. We did notice that those feelings of mutuality and togetherness didn't last long. It'd be nice if we could call that back without the horror of 9/11, but those feelings of togetherness didn't last long, and we're as divided as we ever were now as a nation. And in some ways even more so, because I think it so shocked us. and frightened us and took us off balance. And our reaction to our way of trying to say this must never happen again now threatens to sort of radicalize us in a way over against those radicals who did this to us. And as a pastor, in pastoral conversation, I noticed in the months afterwards conversations among people of faith, and some of them are frankly shocking and almost as shocking as the original event. And the hatred, the mistrust, the suspicion, and frankly the fear that underlies it all has been dismaying for me. And one of the lasting effects for me is to try to determine that I would not allow myself to be set against neighbors of faith in the world who are as appalled as I am and as we all are at these events, who stand on the other side of that religious question. And if anything, it has sort of radicalized me to try to find the way of peace and to reach out to my, not only my Muslim neighbors in the world, but everybody in the world who differs from me religiously, culturally. And so that's been a lasting effect for me. I think if we don't come together in a commitment for peace, we will just all remain victims of this and just like, all right then, let's circle the wagons, let's get bigger guns, and let's kill them all if we can. And that's not the kind of world we want for our children, our grandchildren, or for ourselves for that matter. So I think the lasting effect has been to redouble my efforts to think, we need to think seriously about how we find the road to peace. And it's got to begin with us. Yeah. I love that old poster that says, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. We have to become that road ourselves and have the courage to speak about it and witness to it. So I'm so glad you're here, Özkan, and I too am sorry this happened. And it's just such a gift for us to be able to sit around this table afterwards and be together in peace. You know, so good.
Well, thanks. You know, as I thought about it, I too remember the day very well. We were, and the local pastors in Hudson still do it. Every Tuesday morning, we'd meet at 7:30 or 8 for coffee and a conversation. And one of the secretaries came down and said, "You ought to come and look at this." And so we ran up to a TV that was someplace in the office and watched it. And I'll never forget the feeling of all the clergy in town. And I think every church building in town then was open the next day, maybe the next couple of days, all day. Several had prayer services and things of that sort. And my own thinking certainly concurs with all of yours that there's been a kind of a cultural psychic shift ever since. You know, maybe a decade ago already, a fellow by the name of Michael Moore, which some of us like and others detest, wrote a book that said, in effect, you know, there's a zero probability that any of us are going to get killed by a terroristic event. I mean, in terms of probability statistics with which you're familiar, it's basically zero. And yet, even given that, the changes that have taken place in our life and our psyche over these years are dramatic, from going to the airport and having to take off your shoes and all this sort of stuff, the TSA, which is the biggest bureaucracy in our federal government now, which is to preserve our safety. I mean, our whole way of thinking has shifted, and it's shifted and maintained by virtue of what we've all talked about, fear. We are now a fear-based culture instead of a trust-based culture, in my judgment. And then that carries over on how we deal with people. And I'll never forget, we were making some calls 5-6 years ago for political purposes, and asking people what their biggest concern was, and even people in Roberts or Emerald or some of the, it's terrorists. and so, anyway, it's history, but it's still in present. So given all of that, then how do we pick up on what you said about working for peace? I mean, how can we start the process of developing trust that is necessary for peace, risk that is necessary for peace, and a different definition of the people around us than we're doing now?
Can I start?
Please.
I want to connect with mysticism, our
Yes.
today's topic. I think we should start ourselves, inside ourselves, and reconnect with the Creator. Because eventually, the Creator, I mean, we have a certain impact on our path, but the bigger path is determined by the Creator. And if we reconnect, we will see that things happen because He wants them to happen. And this will give us an inner peace. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be on the right path and we should do whatever is necessary to do, but the bigger picture is it's Him. So reconnecting will give us will allow us to calm down a little bit, because we really don't have an impact. But just to be upright and put the faith into Him and live the way. So I think once we start with that and then working on that, so Islamic mysticism is actually that. It is all about working towards accomplishing the path that leads to, I don't want to say unite, because in some books it says uniting with the Creator, with God. But it's more about going the straight path that brings us to Him, which is afterlife and not really here, which means unification is not here. I don't want to claim that there are some Sufis that have said that they are God. I mean, there is in the history of Sufism that even they were killed because of that. But it's more about I'm just obeying Him. And once we get that connection, we don't deal with others. Why would I deal with someone who has a different faith, who has a different lifestyle? Why would I do it? It's not my business. I'm responsible for my own behavior. And I believe, from the Muslim perspective, there are so many Muslims who care more about others than themselves in terms of who obeys more. So that we should stop doing that.
Peace begins with me.
Exactly.
Thanks for the segue into our topic for today, which is to be mysticism.
Yeah.
I came across a quote from Albert Einstein. Do you know him?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Most of us has. I thought this was, I would have never imagined Dr. Einstein saying something like this. He said, "The most beautiful and profound emotion we can experience is the sensation of the mystical. He or she to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand in rapt awe, is as good as dead. To know that what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant feeling, which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their primitive forms, this knowledge, this feeling, is at the center of true religion." How does that quote strike you? If you put that in real people talk, Einstein, I suspect, maybe was a little more insightful than the rest of us. I'm not sure. But what do you think he was saying there?
Well, I'll try and segue. I think he's talking about the kind of what Ox was talking about, the direct experience of the divine. In fact, that's one of the things I wrote up about the Kabbalah, is it's towards a direct experience of the divine, and that God, actually you start looking at Kabbalah and there's like a lot of different views on it and a lot of different explanations of what it is and what it entails. But basically, There's the concept of Ein Sof, which is that God is without end. He's beyond the infinite. Everything is made of him. And then there's the Yesh, which is that which has a beginning and an end. And the idea within it is to realize that God is inside you, outside you, and to become enlightened is to realize that the line between God is like this giant circle, you're a little circle within it, and is to kind of those lines get blurred, and you realize the individual, like you're saying, becomes part of that divine and realizes the divine within himself and realizes that God is there, God is part of you, you're part of God, and to live that way, to become that type of thing. And I like that thought, and it's great theoretically, but we're just, the issue I seem to pop in my mind is, that's great for us because we're sitting here and we're able to do that and we're talking, but how do we do that? And I don't have an answer. But, we had the president last night talking about how we're going to go after ISIS. We just had that whole thing with the Gaza, and Israel, and it's, Israel, and obviously it's a Jewish perspective here, but Israel just can't say, okay, they're going to bomb us, we're going to sit still, and, they're out for the destruction of Israel. So they're defending themselves, and that's a hot topic in and of itself. But, the direct experience of the divine, living in God's will, doing, realizing the divine within you and living that way. But how do we deal with that in the quote-unquote real world? I'm not saying this isn't real. I believe it's real, and I think if everyone did that, we'd have the answer. But sometimes, and I hate this because I'm all about peace, but sometimes, especially, you look at Hitler and the great evil in the world, sometimes you do have to do something that's not peaceful to stop this. And it does start with us, and if everyone does that, I really think eventually there will be, we'll all be looking towards that infinite source of goodness and live that way. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm just posing other things out there. But in any case, I think for those of us that can get there, direct experience of the divine is excellent, and it leads eventually towards that higher evolved thing. And you would think at this point in the human world, why are our answers coming about through violence and war? Are we really moving in a good direction? So anyway, that's a lot. I have a bunch of questions on that, but
I think in the mystical path we would want to identify peace as not the absence of conflict, war, violence, but the presence of something that is beyond our understanding. I think the key word that you've both used is an experience of God or experience of the divine that is beyond understanding. And some people get nervous about that. They say, we've got enough divine inspiration in the world right now, that's our trouble. But the contemplative or the mystical path has an encounter or an experience of the divine that you don't have to enforce with violence on others, because it's not granted. That doesn't honor the divine or further its purposes in the world. So I think people of all different faiths and of no faith have this mystical experience. Sometimes it happens at the bedside of a loved one on their deathbed. I experienced something like this when my father was dying. My wife had the same thing with both her parents. There was a sense in which it was very sad, but it wasn't only sad. We had a sense that we were standing on holy ground. There was something beautiful to treasure in that journey that we were making with them. So you have the sense that we're part of something bigger, and it's hard to name it, hard to find words, and yet you know it directly in a way beyond words. That's the mystical experience. It's not some super religious experience or an altered state of consciousness. James Finley, who teaches about contemplation and healing, says that it's an unencumbered experience, an experience of just what is, without being encumbered by fear or suspicion or the need to explain, but just straight experience. And when we're in that place, sometimes it happens, you just look up at the night sky and you just have to stop and look. And it's like you have this experience that life is somehow in this moment complete. And you know that the rest of the world and even your own affairs are sort of in tumult, but somehow it doesn't matter in that moment of mystical experience. You are complete. You are whole and strong, and you know something that you can't even explain to yourself, let alone to others, let alone back up and enforce with violence or with rules or something. So I think the mystics are people who are willing to let people be wherever they are on their path. I mean, we talk and we cajole and we might even argue, but we don't enforce. So this isn't a political program. This doesn't say, oh, then we all lay down our arms. We don't have a standing army anymore. We know how unrealistic and how dangerous that would be in some cases, but it is nevertheless to live in the presence of that peace that passes understanding, as Jesus said. And out of that, speak and listen and reason. And if that experience were to be multiplied and recommended and taught, and it could have political ramifications. There might be more people who would be quicker to listen and slower to speak and slower to anger. Because the mystics are generally people who don't start big fights and wars. Sometimes they do go to war. I mean, they do go as warriors, when they're called upon to do that. And they can do so nobly and patriotically and so on. But they also can recognize the Buddha or the Christ or the face of God, even in the face of the enemy. And that begins to alter the chemistry, even in war. So I don't think we're talking about a political program here of how to lay down arms, but we are asking, is there a peace that is not simply the absence of conflict, but the presence of God? And that's what I hear you saying, yeah. Özkan, too, is this experience of God that does not lead us to war.
No, the other day I was reading the Quran. We know Caleb and Abel, and they're brothers, right? And
Cain. I say Cain and Abel. Yeah.
Cain, you say Cain, not Caleb.
Yeah.
We say Cain. Okay, Cain and Abel. I'm sorry for that. So sorry for.
Same story.
Yeah, so the same story. Good. And Cain killed Abel, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Just out of jealousy. And the dialogue in Quran says, both sacrifice something to God just to show that they appreciate what they got. God accepted Abel's, but not Cain's. So he said, I will kill you. And Abel said, if you try to kill me, I won't do anything. Just go ahead and kill me. But God only accepts sacrifices or gifts from those who are sincere. And Cain killed Abel. So that was striking to me because he didn't do anything to defend himself. Mm-hmm. So I think when we talk about mysticism, he totally was relying on God's or on his destiny that was predestined by God. Mm-hmm. And he just stood there. And I don't know, we don't know how it really happened, but that's how it is described, and he just stood there. So that's, again, what you said, you can't really change. But at the same time, even if the enemy or someone who will strike you, sometimes you really can't do anything. And Abel got accepted, Cain not. That's
the teachers of contemplation talk about the two different types of consciousness we have. One is the ego consciousness. And we're born in a body and we're located in space and time, and I got to take care of myself. I got to make plans. I got to work and so on. But we have those moments, almost moments out of time, when you're sort of aware that you're part of something bigger than just your own ego consciousness. You feel a sort of a kinship or oneness with the heavens, with another person, a child, a lover, with God. And you sense that your true self is beyond this ego self. So when we're in this ego consciousness, there's fear attached to that. Because I could die, somebody could kill me. If we could be in the more spacious consciousness of the unitive knowledge, the knowledge that we are one with God, we wouldn't be threatened, because we know that fear has no foundation, no reason for us. We have nothing to fear. And I think the great religious seers and leaders of the world, in my tradition, it's Jesus. There are many of the prophets in both Judaism and Islam, and the teachers. They are those who've had that experience, and they act and speak without fear. And we need to take that more seriously. And we're all running around so fast, taking care of all our ego needs. We rarely slow down and take time to contemplate, to just listen to our heartbeat, or focus on our breath, or just pray to our God in silence. We're always trying to figure everything out and live in the ego consciousness. But there are those moments that occur to us almost spontaneously. People have them. All kinds of people have them. Of just a sudden awareness, like an awakening, that we're part of something bigger. And if we could find ways to nurture those and bring those moments to bear on our lives, I think our lives would be different. And I think out of that fertile soil of that experience, the world could be affected for good as well. At least the contemplatives tell us so, you know.
You know, I think the little reading I've done on this is that our own culture is almost averse to contemplation or meditation. Of all the cultures in the world, we probably do it less than anybody else. I've often wondered if it's in part because we are a culture that strongly believes in the empirical world. If you can't feel it, smell it, taste it, touch it, see it, it doesn't exist. I mean, this is the culture in which we grow. And so to even think that there is a reality outside of the empirical, the measurable world, we're made fun of a lot of times. I mean, and so my question is, do you think it's more difficult for Western cultures, maybe particularly, who have such a strong empirical base to not only believe in mysticism, but even be conscious of the fact that they may be experiencing it without even realizing it?
I think it's a given in our Western society, because everything is all about me. You know, we had the me generation in the 70s, this consumer-oriented thing, buy, it's me, me. And I like what you were talking about as far as losing ego. I mean, that's one of the things that in my Kabbalah research is about, you know, the ego directs people to be selfish, narrow-minded, limited, addicted, hurtful. And it's a main source of problems because it allows us to believe that others are separate from us. It's the opposite of sharing and humility. So the losing of the ego, the losing of the self-importance is what allows us to move past that self-absorption, which seems to be increasing, especially with all the, I mean, what's the latest word in the Oxford Dictionary? Selfies, the self-pictures. I mean, all this technology supposedly in a way is bringing us together, but it's all about me, like I just had an omelet. And it's like I just, you know, you have to post that on your social media, and I'm taking pictures, I'm here, I'm there. It's like this 24/7 concern with myself, like you know, and believing that everyone else is interested in them when really they're only interested in themselves also. So I think we're less and less likely to lose that self. And obviously, I mean, not obviously, but, you know, I've always heard the opposite of fear is faith, or the opposite of fear is love. And so when we move outside ourselves in this self-absorption, think about others. What can we do to help others? What can we do to make the world better? We're moving closer to that divine, and we're moving closer towards losing our self-importance, which is one of the keys, I think, to reaching that space and being aware of the mystical. And then the other thing I was thinking about when you brought that up is how some people believe that anything that they can't experience or is somehow different or more spiritual is somehow also negative or evil or devil or witchcraft. And it's just, you know, obviously not the case. It also, in a way, another thing I was reading about is how it's a direct experience of the divine. So it kind of takes out some of the middle people who are helping you reach the divine, whereas you just go straight to the divine. So in some facets, it has that negativity. But unfortunately, yeah, I think all this, the new technology, which is really now bringing us closer together, is making us seem more self-important and less, which then this self-importance leads us away from the divine. So.
Reflections?
You know, right now I'm really, maybe my facial expression, I'm surprised to hear, if you wouldn't have said Kabbalah, it would be same like Sufism, what you said. It's the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the ego and kind of rubbing the ego away so that only the soul stands strong in the face of God. And that's the same. So if you wouldn't have said Kabbalah, it's the Sufism in Islam. That's what it is.
Asghani, I remember reading years ago some writer saying that if you got all the scholars of the world religions together, they would begin by being very respectful and listening, so on, but pretty soon their disagreements would start, and pretty soon they'd be yelling, and the din would be impossible. But if you get the mystics from the different faith traditions together, they would listen, and it would be a quiet, respectful conversation, because they recognize in the things said that the truth does not lie in the words spoken, but the words are like fingers pointing to that to which they bear witness. The word God is not God. The word God is a pointer to God. God is more than what I can think or name. The Sufis know that. The Jewish mystics know that. The Christian mystics know that. And so when we're in the presence of that sort of unknowing, respectfully, we can listen and we can try to share the gift of words that names what we know and what we experience. The gift of language then is like really precious to us when it helps us name that which we're experiencing. But when we fight about the words, because you don't use my words, there, you don't use Jesus, therefore, I can, not do business with you or, drag your name through the mud. That's all based in ego. The ego needs to be right. But if you know that, one of my favorite books by James Allison, The Joy of Being Wrong, you know you can't be right about God. You can't ever say it. You can't ever say God into being here. All you can do is point to God and witness to God. And so you get what I'm saying. The ego needs to fight about that and make others wrong and make itself right. But the mystics, those who know, what is it? Lao Tzu says, those who know don't say. Those who say don't know. So there's a kind of a
very wise
little
wonderful, yeah.
a little irony there or something. We need to speak. God gives us the gift of speech to bear witness. But we need God to speak God's own word through our words, rather than thinking we need to be God's enforcers.
You know, if I listen to the three of you, it just sounds to me that each of the religious traditions have done a really bad job of sharing their faith with the followers over the years. I mean, how many clergy, rabbis, imams spend their time talking about just that sort of thing? Rather, the conversation probably deals most often with the ego. It must, because certainly each of our three religions have been responsible for much of the evil that's taken place in the world in the past centuries. So what are our church leaders doing wrong to get us to this mess? When we seem to have a fairly clear picture of what it takes to get out of the mess.
I don't know about that, Dan.
Me neither.
Yeah. But it does kind of bring us back in circle to where we started with 911 and the danger of ego-centered religion, religion that thinks that it knows and it's right. And in one sense, I suppose religious teaching is like God gave us these dangerous things to play with, words and beliefs. They could be great gifts, but misused or used without understanding, they're like giving a kid gasoline and matches to play with, or giving nuclear power. Well, you can make nuclear bombs, or you can power a city. Depending on the motive that's in the heart. And when ego gets a hold of the knowledge of God, look out. That's really dangerous stuff. And what we're seeing in the world is a result of ego religion. And what we're calling for is live your faith in hope and love before you beat up others about it, I guess, Walk the walk before you think you can instruct others. Learn to know God in the silence and humility of prayer.
Well, it's a tough thing because, even from little children, the question is, do you believe in ghosts? What we're talking about is two levels of reality. The reality that we are trapped in. It's a finite. We live in a temporal and finite world. That's a part of our nature. From the Christian faith, since the fall, but all of us realize we aren't God. We can't place ourselves as a God. We can't fully understand it, and so we give lip service to that, and yet we continue to think we know exactly what God would have us to do, and we're sure God is on our side, and maybe in part it's because we haven't done enough to instruct ourselves and others into the second reality, the meta-reality, the metaphysics, that there is an existence beyond our ability to understand, equally valid, maybe even more important, and maybe we should be spending a little more time on meta-religion, that thing beyond our understanding. Is that what you're saying?
I think so, and the how of that is a little hard. You're talking about meditating, teaching people how to meditate, perhaps,
How long can you sit still and meditate?
Well, I try to do it for 20 minutes, and that always seems like a long time. And of course, it's full of noise when I'm doing that, but that's all right.
No, I didn't mean to put you down. I mean, that's part of at least my struggle.
Well,
Is just trying to be peaceful for a little bit.
I was at a seminar one time where we were using centering prayer. Some people know that term, centering prayer, contemplative prayer, prayer of silence. And we were just learning this years ago, and our teacher told us we were going to become silent. And then we discovered that it was impossible, literally impossible, to turn off your brain and become silent. And then the teacher asked us, well, if you can't stop your own thinking, then who's thinking? And maybe these brains we have are just like machines cranking out thoughts, and we quickly identify with what's going on in our consciousness. Our ego consciousness quickly identifies with our body and our bodily thoughts and sensations. But if you become an observer of that in centering prayer, you become aware of you're an observer of your own thinking. Well, then who's thinking and who's observing? There's a different level of your being. One is thinking, but there's a deeper level of you're observing your own thinking. And you become aware of that deeper self and begin to nurture the awareness of that. And it can begin to transform your consciousness and make you open to others who are also participating in that journey into the knowledge of a deeper reality. And there is a peace and an openness and a kind of a congeniality that lives there sort of naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what the teachers of contemplation are encouraging us to learn. Yeah.
Well, I'm almost embarrassed to admit how much I've enjoyed these moments as they've gone by. We actually hope we've confused you out there. And because somebody said it's out of the crucible of confusion that certainty comes. So, and you can't really learn until you find something that jars up against the reality we live to sort of force us to think these things through. So I hope you don't take this negatively, but I hope we've confused you today and made you quite uncomfortable, as has happened to me in this conversation. And so are there any last minute comments you want to make before we thank you for sticking with us and bring this to a close?
So maybe the last word, don't allow the ego to take over.
Sounds good.
I'm just confused.
Okay.
Well, we will be with you again. I hope this will be interesting enough to draw attention to the next time we're on. We thank you very much for being with us. Don't be afraid to let us know through the station here what you think of us. And if there are topics you'd like us to discuss, please know that we would welcome them. Until that happens, we are again grateful for your presence. We thank you for the day and hope to see you again soon. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you.